Let's start. So this is less a session on just the CMG. God, this mic is loud. Less a session just on the general CMG and what you've heard from marketing and all the rest of the blurb on it. I'll give a bit of introduction, and then I'm going to go into what we term internally at PowerOn something called CMG-ageddon. So just give you a bit of an insight of when things go badly wrong, the types of areas where you can go look, the type of things you need to be aware of, and just give you a bit more of an insight into an actual operational CMG environment. So, as been alluded, my name is Steve Beaumont. I'm just even checking that I've spelled that right now. That's really bad. I have to check to spell my own name. As Rob says, it's the first time speaking with WMUG. However, I am a seasoned speaker. I used to be a Microsoft MVP within the cloud and data center arena. Hence, having the lovely chance to work on various different books with very esteemed people like Sam sat over in the corner, around operations manager, service manager, orchestrator, the other system center components, the ones that are now the ugly duckling of the family, because we have config manager that is the one that's known for system center stuff. I am also Chief Technology Officer at PowerOn Platforms, and it's part of what we do at PowerOn that led me to do this session, because we work very closely with the CMG. I also wanted to drag Raphael up on stage today to present with me because he did a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about. However, he's really shy. So just to embarrass him even more, he sat over there in the back corner giggling away, and you might recognize him from the Power BI config manager dashboards that are available online. So if you really do despise what's in the content of the Power BI dashboards, that's your man to go and speak to at the break and say, can you add this, can you add that, this doesn't work, that doesn't work, and give him all the grief, because they are actually really, really good. So do give them some credit as well. So, just to give you a bit of that background in case you have been living under a rock for the last few years. So back in about 2003 BC, before cloud, we had this thing called the Internet-Based Client Management. I can never say it because it sounds like it's a nuclear missile otherwise. But somebody decided that they wanted to do management of devices out on this thing called the World Wide Web, and they needed a method of doing it. So this IBMC, Internet-Based Client Management, was brought, I did say it the wrong way around, didn't I? Was brought in to try and alleviate that problem. However, it meant you had to put stuff out in your DMZ. God forbid anyone's not having this stuff sat in your DMZ because it's direct connections in. You had to have multiple firewall ports open, go and do certificates, gets lots of approval from security of why you're doing this. And it wasn't exactly the easiest thing. You wouldn't just go and put this in over the weekend. Lots and lots of planning and challenges. However, someone thought, right, actually, there's got to be a better way to do this now that we have this thing called the cloud. So 2017 AC, after cloud, somebody decided to invent this thing called the CMG. It could also have been somebody just looking for Azure attached services to meet the revenues inside Microsoft, but we'll go with making our life easier. Now, it's a lot more simple. You don't need to have lots of Azure knowledge. Yes, you do have to have this attached to Azure. We're not talking about loads of complex ports anymore. We're just talking about one outbound, and it's 443. We'll not go into the other complexities for this session. It's one port. But it makes it a lot easier, and it also means it's scalable as well. Don't have to worry about, actually, have we got capacity in the DMZ to deploy 10 servers? It's like, no, can I afford to spin up some servers in Azure? So that's what the CMG is. But if we already had this thing for managing internet-based, why are we bothering to go and replace it? So to break it down to my three personal simple things, features, the complexity of trying to understand how you deploy, you and you and you and you, deploy something inside your organization is a nightmare for developers. Trying to think of all them different permutations, one person does it this way, we do a different operating system, we lock down these ports, we have network access control. It's a nightmare to try and make things work at scale and keeping up in pace, speed-wise, for on-premise. So moving it to the cloud makes a lot more sense. It's standardized, we know where it's sat, we can make certain assumptions that will always be in place. It allows developer-wise to rapidly iterate on features. So this is good with moving stuff to the cloud. It allows you as customers to get the benefits of the development team's weird and wonderful ideas a lot quicker. Security, as I mentioned, sticking stuff in your DMZ, it's like, yes, we do security. We're really good. We lock this down. Yeah, great, but then you've got all the hassle of trying to say, well, actually, if we do this, is that secure, is that secure, is that secure? So again, moving it to that edge of the cloud makes it a lot simpler for security. We only do talk about at least one port out. Yeah, so there's a little chuckle there when I say at least one port. By default, you need port 443 to talk outwards, and I'm stressing the outwards connection. This is the thing. We're not talking about drilling in and allowing the massive, ever-changing range of IP addresses from the Azure data center edge in. We're talking about your primary site being able to talk out on 443. Now, yes, if you scale it out, you can start to talk about 1023, 1024, and onwards, and there's a range of ports you do, but it's still manageable. You just have to make sure that certain ports are open outbound from your primary site server. And again, it's that management overhead. Some people sometimes look at me and go, you're so lazy. No, I like to think of I'm smart about avoiding work. That's my take on it anyway. So would I rather have a server in my DMZ, or should I say 4, 5, 6 servers in my DMZ that I need to worry about patching, maintaining, latest current branch comes out, got to make sure that applies to them all, lifecycle management, or can I just say, I pressed a button, yes, I'm done. It's a lot easier, obviously, when you get to CMG because you're not worrying about that on-premises infrastructure. So, I always like to get a bit of feedback and participation during my sessions. So Jason's done a good job of robbing a lot of my content beforehand and giving you ideas, so we'll see how much you were listening. Who can name some of the current capabilities of the CMG? Go on, Leon. I'm picking on you because no one else has volunteered yet. Yeah, that's the name of the thing, but what does it offer? What can you do with your clients when you're out there? Anything, sorry? Yep, so we've got software updates, inventory, what was them other couple of things? Not quite. Close enough. This is what I'm trying to get to. So it's a subset currently of a lot of what the management point can do. We've got the software update, we've got inventory, we've got the, software deployment, software updates come next, endpoint definitions, and that's about it on compliance settings. So you had a lot of what Jason was talking about today with compliance settings and stuff that we can now manage outbound, which is great. So we've gone from, all right, fine, we're either having to maintain direct access or VPN solutions, clients go wandering off on the internet, and we lose visibility of them for a while. Yes, we could have all that infrastructure in place to be able to just keep that mentality of being able to see them. And there is nothing that internet-based client manager, IBCM can do that the CMG can't. So we're already on feature parity and going above and beyond that. So great, we can now have a level of management. We don't have to worry about them going out into the world and losing visibility of them. There are a couple of other things, especially that's come into play recently, that is showing how and where this is starting to go. So we did get support officially now for doing in-place Windows 10 upgrades. So it seems that the CMG does support Windows 7 devices. If you think about those Windows 7 devices are out there, if you have a lot of remote working staff, rather than having to worry about dragging them back in just to get Windows 10 on them, if you've got CMG in place, you can start to do remote Windows 10 migration projects. It's always a bonus. Now, that's officially supported now. That doesn't mean that it didn't actually work beforehand, and there are other things that you can do, especially around OSD, in a non-supported fashion, but this shows you the start of how flexible this is going to become for those remote, non-VPN joined, no direct access needed, just as long as they have an internet connection, we can do stuff with them. User-based application deployment from 1802. So this was one thing that we definitely couldn't do with IBCM, but we can with the CMG. And even more importantly, we can now do available targeted application deployment. There's a range of different prereqs that go behind that around Azure AD, making sure users are synced in bits and pieces. But it's great that we can offer a catalog via the software center for users to drag down even when they're out on the internet. Scripts. I'm glad that nobody, when I did ask about naming the features, jumped on this one because I saw Jason doing the session. I was like, don't say too much on scripts. Scripts are awesome. So just alone to have that functionality in Config Manager and being able to attack your estate in any manner that you mean or not mean to do, you can now extend that out to internet-based clients without even thinking about it. It's not as if you sit there and you go, well, actually, I'm going to exclude this collection because they're internet-based, or I'm going to only target them. Just don't care. Just treat them as if they are connected devices and go off and run whatever you want on them different clients. And then we've got CM Pivot that Jason finished on. That, again, just to stress, does work across the CMG because it is using the fast channel. Now, there's lots of other bits that are in the technical preview that are coming through. We've just seen Wake on LAN being added to use fast channel usage. That doesn't work through the CMG yet. In theory, it might, kind of, but it's not supported because that's needing boundaries and stuff. So there's other bits that you have to be aware of because obviously when they're out on the internet, you're not specifically putting them in boundaries. So there's a little bit of nuances around it. But the idea is anything that gets added to the fast channel usage can potentially be used through the CMG. So this CMG technology is started. We got it roughly, was it about 1610, 1702, and then we saw it come a lot more to the forefront from 1710 onwards. This is just the starting point. We're getting more and more stuff that comes through here. Enough, oh no, last little bit. Talking again about where the evolution's going. So I keep on mentioning the CMG, Cloud Management Gateway. There is currently this thing called the CDP that you should use in conjunction with it. So that's the cloud distribution point. Because it's all right, great, fine, we're managing clients out there in the wild. But if you say, well, actually, I want to drag down a piece of software, you obviously need to have the content for that software to drag down. So we put it on a cloud distribution point. Now, at the minute, they exist, or at the minute, currently, if you've not changed it, they existed as two separate VM services. So you had the cost of double, I'd say the management overhead, but there's practically none there, but they were two separate entities. Starting with, I think it was 1806. I don't know whether anyone else can nod or confirm on that one. Yep, 1806. I tell you, the rapid cycle from Microsoft on this makes presenters' lives a nightmare trying to keep up with numbers. But they've combined the roles of the CMG and CDP. So there's now just a lovely little tick box option that says, right, well, I have my CMG, tick a box, it now becomes that content distribution point. So it basically puts the Azure storage attached underneath it. Now, there is this thing called, in Azure Resource Manager, ARM versus what was the legacy, which is the ASM. The cloud, or the things that the cloud management gateways use underneath in Azure are known as cloud services. And they are cloud services running on that classic model. So while we've now brought in, or Microsoft brought in support for Azure Resource Manager to do the deployment, so this is a thing that I always make a very big distinction of so people are aware. Previously, you used what was known as certificate management to say, I'm using this cert, talk to Azure to create the backend infrastructure and maintain it. Now with the ARM model, Resource Manager, you can sign in with your credentials and it uses all the different APIs and stuff to manage and create the resources. But that's all it's doing. So yes, you have a modern authentication method to manage the Azure side, but it's still using the legacy cloud services, which means if any of you are under a CSP subscription with partners, the CSP subscriptions don't include the legacy cloud services or the ASM model, so you cannot deploy cloud management gateways in them subscriptions. Not the end of the world, go and get pay-as-you-go subscription and just use that for your CMGs. You're still linking to the Active Directory sides and bits and pieces, but you won't be able to do the actual deployment side for the CMGs. Now, wildcard certificates, they can now be used. Sounds like a really minor point. However, previously, you were tied to the name of the actual CMG that you'd spin up, and the DNS names was based on what your certificate name was. If you wanted multiple, you needed multiple certificates. Wildcards, previously, you could go through the GUI and say, right, here is my wildcard, I'm going to go on. And it would go, yeah, I'm not going to let you actually choose the name, so your name is blank. And that doesn't work when you try to deploy anything. Null values are never really good when it comes to deployment. We now get such a simple change of, when you use a wildcard, you can edit the field and add your DNS names. So you can use one certificate over and over and over for multiple connections. And, again, these are little minor things, and you'll see probably why it makes my life a lot easier. If you're still using the cloud distribution point, when you create one now, it will actually create it with a DNS name of what you specify with your certificate or when you choose with wildcard, rather than a random string of characters. And you'll see as I go into my portal, I've got a couple of the old ones left, and it's just like, my God, what are they? What do they relate to? And it's never good when you want to visually just check in the portal and go, oh yeah, that's for customer 5. Now, we're on to the good bits. So that was a bit of background just to get you familiar with some of the concepts I'm going to talk about. But internally within PowerOn, we have this, not concept, we have this nickname for probably one of the roughest or most fun weeks of recent times called CMG Ageddon. We heavily rely on the CMGs. We have a multi-tenancy config manager environment for other customers, which means we don't touch their LANs, which means everything we do is basically internet-based facing. So without the CMGs, we're dead in the water because we don't have VPNs into their environment. It's just internet. Biggest thing for me is standard monitoring will not pick up some of the failures I'm going to talk about. The CMGs themselves, while there is some stats and stuff displayed within the actual console, they do not have a component status monitor that rolls up actual health information and stuff about it. So you're not going to be able to look in your config manager console and go, oh yeah, that's critical, we better do something. You end up waiting for users to ring you to go, hey, nothing seems to be working today, and that's bad. So having that type of response when you're looking at things like this, it's not good. So hopefully start to think about methodologies that you can use to put in an extra layer of monitoring around your CMGs. Now the log files, and I've got one example of one of the ones that I kept, look very scary and not very useful. Not when you get into this type of quasi-state that we was in. So like I say, things were up, but they weren't working. And it's kind of like, whoa, what do we do? Turning it on and off again didn't work. We tried that. Rang Raf, we tried turning it on and off. And unfortunately, Microsoft support was super slow on this. There's a lot of different combinations within our personal example that compounded the impact on this, because there was some Azure fun and games going on as well at the same time. So, where to start troubleshooting? As I mentioned, there's not a component monitor within here, so we fall back to logs. And I think everyone's probably going to agree within the CM world, logs we're used to, they're our friends. It's just finding the right ones to go and actually look at and dig into. So most of the logs are thankfully on the primary site server. So a lot of the information from the CMGs does get copied across, and you can actually digest it centrally from the primary site server without needing to go out. There are a couple of bits and pieces still on the CMGs, and we'll talk about what they are. I mentioned there's no status monitor, so it's not as if you're going to see just red things popping up all over the place. There is, within the console, if for those of you that have got it or seen the demos of it, you can go through and you can see the CMG that you've deployed, and you'll get various metrics coming back around how many bytes have been transferred, which services and endpoints are doing the communication channels, but that's about it. There is some new dashboards coming through, so I think it was either 1806 or one of the tech previews, where we now have this CMG lifecycle dashboard, which does show you things like number of concurrent connections and so on. Saves you having to dig into the database for that information. So, I am going to go in and now start to show some of the various different bits and pieces. However, before I do, I think my next... I've missed a slide. No, there it is. I skipped past it earlier. Don't mess with this stuff. While I'm quite happy to show you some of the thoughts and the processes around it, that is not a red flag to a bull to say, go mess with this. Under normal circumstances, leave this stuff alone. It should just work. Only if you're working with Microsoft support or you have a test lab and you really just want to dig around and break stuff, then go and mess with it. But don't take this as verbatim, oh, I'm going to go back and log on to my CMG up in the cloud and see what it's about. No, just please do leave it alone. So, oh, I'm already there. Nice one. So, this is a cut down view of some of our bits and pieces, and I just want to highlight some of these. So, like I say, you have this concept of cloud services. This is where you can go and find anything that's related to it. Now, there is storage accounts as well behind some of the cloud distribution points, or if you've got that combined analysis, so there's just some bits that you can go and dig into there. They're not that interesting, so I'm going to leave them out of here because they're just a random collection of files. It's not as if you can browse the file structure and say, oh, there's Adobe Acrobat XC. It's just not like that. Now, the ones that we're interested in are obviously the gateways for this session. You can see that it's spun up the cloud services for some of my CDPs as well. Now, that is the one that I did want to call out from earlier, where I said that by default, it used to just do a complete random set of strings. It's like, yay, great, which one's that one related to? You have to dig into the properties of the console and try and match and mirror exactly which ones it's called. Thankfully, recently, when you start to deploy it from 1802 onwards, it does actually keep the names of the certificates that you deploy from. So that's a problem that's going away. And it's also tempting that if you are in that scenario at the minute, do you actually make the effort to go and destroy it and recreate it? It's kind of how much your risk factor is within your organization versus ease of administration. Now, we have a load of bits and pieces. So this is the stuff that you don't, like I say, usually go in and mess around with or need to know, but I wanted to highlight it. So when you do go into Azure and you start digging around on what it actually has deployed, yes, you get the usual things about what are your edge point names and all the rest of it. Public IP addresses, these will be completely dynamic, so ignore what it is. It makes no use whatsoever. It's the actual DNS name that you need to be more worried about. Now, some of the interesting bits for me are around things like the configuration side. So this is where you start to see a lot of what the information that Microsoft push up from your primary site server based on your settings and your configuration, and they are displayed here. Again, I will keep on stressing, while it's very tempting to go in and add extra letters and stuff, do not mess with these, you will break it instantly. But this gives you a bit of insight as you can start to dig in and see things like your certificates. Now, this has always been one of the funnest bits of CMGs, is getting the certificate bits right. So if you want to do that validation to make sure that, has it uploaded my chain? Because this was always the biggest one when it asks you about your root CA internally, your sub-CA, if you have any other issuing CAs, what has been actually uploaded, because there are limitations on the number of sub-CA certs that you can upload. You can come into the portal and check your thumbprints. Right, sense check. This was the one that I uploaded. Has it gone into the right store? Because we've seen instances before where your sub-CA cert actually ends up as your root CA. Just double check on that side. All the rest of it is there for information. I'm not going to dig too much into here because it will expose some of my tenant IDs, but you can see, again, what are my Active Directory IDs that it's actually properly synchronizing up to the actual cloud gateway and so on. Now, the one bit as we started to troubleshoot this, which was helpful, was the operation log. Yes, I do want to discard my edits. No, that's interesting. This is how much the CMGs often throw me, because literally just preparing for this and checking it this morning, it was completely red, and now we have successes. Yay. Okay, that's interesting. But in here, you will see the activities that your primary site server starts to push up to the CMG. So the way that it interacts with it, the way it starts to say, right, I need to change settings, is it does push to the Azure backend these deployment packages. It gets processed, you start to see within here, check the logs, you can start to see what it is that it's actually doing to the backend in terms of actually configuring it. Now, I don't know why that this has just changed. Oh, I know why, because this is the wrong CMG. I can flick to the other one, but you'll see that there is a series of deployment errors, which was a very telling thing when we had the problem of why are we seeing all these deployment errors? And this is part of the reason why things started to go badly wrong. So we've got all these bits, and you do have, this again, heavy caveat, the ability to enable remote desktop. So whereas these are designed to be completely seamless, don't log on to them, don't mess around with them. I've never been one for following the rules. So you can log on to these things. Now, it is just a standard Windows box at the end of the day. So as you dig into under the cover, you start to see how it's done. It's an IIS server, surprise, surprise. It's doing the web capabilities like a management point, surprisingly. Its whole purpose is to take the stuff that a client would normally send up to a management point, it hits the web service, it knows how to translate it, and it passes it onwards Well, it doesn't actually. The primary site server goes up, checks, and pulls it back down again. So there's bits and pieces within here, and the wonderful naming convention is the OS lives on the D drive. Not seen that since the very early days of Windows 7, but hey. Most of your bits and pieces are going to be stored on either the C drive or the E drive. Now, the E drive is mainly reserved for a lot of the Azure logging and capabilities, whereas the C drive has got some bits and pieces underneath your applications and your config around, well, not the applications, around where it is that we're going to actually deploy and manage some of this stuff. Yes, mate? No. So I'm logged onto the CMG. If I was to log on to the cloud distribution point, you'd be really disappointed. So I had a need where I was trying to work out around some of the bits around branch cache with the cloud distribution point, and I went hunting for the content library because I wanted to see what was there, generate some hash files. You'll see nothing. It's completely abstracted because everything is stored as Azure blobs on the Azure side, and it's all API calls from the actual cloud distribution point. So there's yeah, if you go through Azure and you go through Azure Results Explorer, you will see some stuff in there, yes. But if you log on to the VM, it's not as if you can go to the X drive or anything and browse the content. Is what I was trying to get at. I'm sorry. Yeah, you can still go and browse the content if you really want to, but it should all be hashed and chunked and stuff. So there are bits and pieces in here. Like I say, it's a web server. So one of your first troubleshooting points, like with management points, go and check your IIS logs. Actually start to see what the communication is, what's flowing through it. You can dig through the various different log files. This particular one that I'm logged onto has got next to now in it. It's just doing some various calls and saying, yep, fine, what you're talking to, what you're getting crawled. Nice robots in there. But again, there wasn't a great deal of detail. Sorry? You have to RDP. So because it is a cloud management gateway stored in Azure, it is not domain joined, it's not connected to your network, you have no access to it other than being able to enable RDP, jump on it, and treat it as a workgroup device. So you've got to go onto it that way. What we did find was there wasn't a massive amount of detail within here. Yes, we had access to the IIS logs, which was useful. It was more telling when we was digging through the event viewer and stuff. We were seeing various errors around unable to create certificate channels, unable to actually talk to storage API levels. So this is some of the stuff that we could not see from the primary site server. So yes, it was useful to get on there and have a bit of a dig around. However, that kind of confused the issue a little bit more as you start to talk to Microsoft support and say, hey, we're seeing storage Azure API layers, errors and stuff, and they start to bring in different team members, and it all gets rather confusing. So it's a lot easier to kind of leave that thing alone. Now, back on the primary site server, or one of my jump boxes, most of the logs that you're going to want to look around are either named Cloud DP, if it's a Cloud DP, or prefixed with CMG. So these are some of our logs that was there. Now, normally, you shouldn't see these many. Normally, if I look at some of my live ones, you'll see maybe one or two of them, and that's about it. You might see a rollover. Now, the very fact that we started to see so many rollovers and so many sizes of it started to worry. You can see that that one at 586K, not that I'm zoomed in massively. Probably shouldn't have tried to zoom in because it's doing nothing. 586K is a normal daily operational log. That's what it should be. That's what it should be at. This is what happens when it all goes horribly wrong. Nothing wrong with that at all. So when you come in on daily morning and you get a bit of a, oh, something's not working, and all you see is red for log after log after log after log after log after log, it doesn't really fill you with much confidence. So, yeah, great. Trouble is, it was the same sort of message just being spammed over and over and over and over. So again, not a great deal of use when we start to look at it. You might be thinking at this point, well, great, give me something that makes it easier to troubleshoot. No. This was one of the points that we learned very quickly on this. A lot of this is very black box. It's designed not to be messed around with. You're not supposed to do a lot with it. So when things go wrong with it, you're in a little bit of a quandary. So, conscious of time and trying to get back on. How am I doing for time? Not very well? God damn it. So it's a good job I can skip a bit. Right, so to get to kind of the conclusion points on this one. So for us, we had a very specific problem at this point. So most people have gone, fine, turn it on and off again. Or the next step, because that didn't work, I'll just delete it and recreate it. That's what I was trying to get to. While there's lots of logs there, you can dig into it, you can get really hardcore techie with it. It's like porn for geeks. This is not designed to be messed with, so the normal stance is delete it and recreate it, which in a normal environment, that's great, because as your clients go and hit your normal management points, they will get told about any changes, they'll reassociate, things will just carry on. So you might have a blip and wait for a week while people cycle round. We didn't have that luxury because of this. When you create a cloud management gateway, you will get assigned a mutual auth number or name. That first bit of it, that's fine. That's derived off your DNS. So you can generally start to keep that the same. My worry was that. If I lost that, I have no way of changing it on our internet-only based clients without going around every single one manually. And trying to ring several hundred customers and get several thousand computers done, you're not going to be flavor of the week if you're doing that. So we had to come up with an idea. And like I say, we were working with Microsoft at this point. They weren't filling me with lots of hope. We came up with a solution. So Raf, very kindly, got the test lab, and I was like, try this, do this. And we thought, well, what happens if we provision a new CMG, but leave that connection point on the management point alone? So we spun up a new CMG. We then changed the connection point on the management point to say, go talk to this new CMG. We then checked that mutual auth, and the ID remained the same. Yes, but the DNS name had changed because it was a new CMG. Okay. We then tore down that broken original cloud management gateway. Confirmed that the mutual auth name still did not change. Spanned up a new one, flipped it back to what was the original but is the new cloud management gateway, compared it again, and it stayed the same. But the DNS name obviously changed back to what it was. So we achieved what we wanted, which was that whole keep the mutual auth name exactly the same. So question was, right, great, that's great in test. Do we just go and hit the big red button and go and do this in live? Or do we let Microsoft try and root cause analysis and come up with another way around it? Now, Raf has blogged on this one. So if you want a little bit more of just some of the log files, some of the error messages we caught out specifically, do recommend you go and check Raf's blog on it. It just means that you can take some of them learnings away rather than listening to me ramble. Pictures done on that? Yeah. So it was fixed. We took the choice and went, yep, fine, let's hit it. And things started to immediately communicate back. And I mean immediately. These clients that were hammering it, they do back off for a while, and then they'll pick back up again every reboot. They kind of try, and then they back off progressively so they don't overwhelm it too much. But as soon as we switched it back, clients just immediately came back in, which is great. We had nothing to do, nothing to change, nothing to mess around with it. But it does mean, and this is why I'm stressing it, that the CMG is designed to be as stateless as possible. All that config that I showed you in the Azure page, that's the stuff that's in the backend database. This is why you don't mess with the stuff up in the cloud side of it. It's there, it's designed, it will pull or push that information up to the CMG. So let it do what it was. The bit for me, though, was the fact that it's the connection point that is the important bit. We did some more further testing. If we move that connection point to a different MP internally, and this is where then it makes you really wonder, especially for us, where we do our really strong backups and maintenance, is we cannot lose our internal MPs. Because as soon as we start to bounce that around internally, we'll get different auth ID numbers. Your clients will need to be told which ones to change. So it's based off your internal management points what that auth ID, mutual auth ID is. Even more so, if you're looking at going down the CMG route, if you haven't already, or if you have and you do not have a test or dev environment, get one flung up. For the sake of just having a single VM somewhere, because that's all it really takes to at least get a dev lab, get it in so you can play with this stuff. Can you imagine if I wanted to go and do testing in production of this type of change in a live production arena? I'd have hung myself because we are so reliant on it. Oops. Root cause? Nobody knows. Microsoft couldn't come up with a definitive. We couldn't come up with a definitive. There was a mixture of different things. There was an Azure storage error in North Europe a couple of days before. Did that knock something out? We did the 1802 upgrade about 10 days before. So there was considerations with the product group or whether, because we know that there's now in the 1710 to 1802 upgrade, there is some cloud management schema changes and stuff. So packages should have been deployed. And we were seeing failure errors. But it's one of them things where it was working and then it kind of gave up and didn't. So unfortunately, and this is like a good Netflix series that gets cancelled, we'll not know and I can leave you hanging on that one. Now, if there's any questions, please do come and grab me at the break and stuff, but trying to get back on time. To mitigate it. So the question is have we actually, especially for us internally, done anything to mitigate it? So obviously I mentioned around about the monitoring side, so we're looking at a lot of different ways to monitor and manage these lot. Unfortunately, because of the way that it was, there is no major mitigation you can do. Apart from now having a very defined standard operating procedure that says, if it all goes Pete-Tong, we know that we can just go bang, 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 and have it deleted and recreated within minutes now. So we do kind of hold one there in the background now, just waiting to be able to flick it, delete the one, recreate the one. And it's ARM templates anyway, so you can spin it up fairly quickly. That makes sense? Awesome. Thank you very much.